Welcome to Das One Hunt. I'm Xiao Pierre Ruth for Information Week. And in this episode, we'll be taking a look at the question of infrastructure, sustainability, and the power dilemma. The thoughts that come into play when there's the data centers and other technology elements that need more and more power, and the different efforts that are being put into play to try and answer those. It's not an easy question to answer for either the technology companies or even the power providers. And there's also some elements of the overall community and the idea of the environment that some folks might want to bring to the table about how this all plays out. But as always, I look to experts who are much smarter than me to kind of inform this kind of discussion. And today I'm very pleased to be speaking with Juan Orlandini, Chief Technology Officer, North America with Insight Enterprises, and Sandeep Chandna, Chief Sustainability Officer with Tech Mahindra. Both of you, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure being here.
Great. All right. So this is, let's preface this by saying that I think we're all fully aware of some of the recent news happening with Microsoft's plans with the reopening of a reactor at 3 Mile Island. But that's not the entire conversation. There are many other elements that come into play when it comes to the idea of power and data centers and kind of like feeding that need. And I was hoping if we can start off, one, when we look at data centers, how energy starved are data centers right now? I'm hearing different things about this in the market. How severe does it seem, at least, to be the imbalance of energy supply versus demand when it comes to the needs that data centers have?
Today, it's actually extremely constrained, is the way I would put it. All right, access to power is it's actually becoming a deciding factor of where companies are either building data centers, relocating their data centers to colos. I actually just recently was helping somebody with a data center migration, and from the time we started the planning till the time the client had actually decided who to go to, 2 of the colos that we contacted actually had sold all of their power. They didn't sell their space, they sold all of their power. So that they didn't even have the customer in the data center. There was startups that were well-funded that were doing AI kinds of workloads, and they bought the power. They didn't even have a workload in the data center. And then the colo actually had to say, I can't host you anymore. So it's extremely constrained. And we're seeing this in colos and self-owned data centers for customers that are choosing to build their own AI infrastructure. They just can't get the power. They can't get the cooling. They can't. It's just it's a mess right now for 100%.
Gotcha. Thank you much for your insight on that. Sandeep, have escalating energy needs among data centers made kind of like the environmental and ESG efforts a bit more difficult to support and really kind of like champion campaign for?
Yeah, thanks, JP. And before I go to this question, JP, I'll come back to and add what Jan also said. See, in the digital world, data centers have become one of the key parameters how we are seeing now increase in data, and then also how the energy itself is becoming a very important part. If I look at the data centers consume almost about 200 terawatt of electricity, which roughly is about 1% of global electricity demand. And as we presume that, in some of the countries, maybe something like Ireland, they account for almost about 14% of the total electricity demand. So how are you gonna get this demand in the future? How are you gonna meet these demands? That's one of the questions which, most of the times we discuss, and I think so, we will also discuss that in our conversation as we move further. Now, when we at Tech Mahindra are working with our customers, that's the time when we see that what is the value add that we can bring when we are doing the managed services work, or whether we are doing something on green IT. That's a major role where we play. Coming to my question, which you said that how ESG would make energy demand and data centers efforts more difficult? Yes. In escalating energy needs certainly presents a challenge for the companies to pursue ESG goal. Between 2020 to 2025, now the data consumption has increased almost triple time based on the data, the traffic of the global data. Now that means the use and the production of consumer devices and the communication network. Now the data center could use almost about as much as 51% of global electricity in 2030. Now this means one is you would be increasing your carbon footprints, which I presume would go to almost about 23% of the globally released greenhouse gases in 2030. Now, this is one part. Second part is also look at the e-waste which is getting generated. Now, data shows that almost about 54 million metric ton of e-waste was generated in almost 2019, and it may touch about 74 million metric ton by 2030. So every aspect that you look in terms of data centers is playing some kind of a challenge for us in meeting the ESG goals and the targets as such. And again, if I go to the social part also, the skill sets to look at ESG are kind of not available today. So that's one more focus area that we could discuss at some point of time.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you for your insight on that. Okay. All right.
No pun intended, right?
All right. Sticking with the ESG side of things, for both of you, can ESG efforts or this green tech efforts is not narrow it down to just that? Can that kind of environmental side of, or at least energy efficiency side of things, help improve management of energy demand when it comes among data centers? Are there aspects of data center operations, such as heat weight management, that could be worked on to address some of associated with the power needs?
So I'm going to take a first stab at that, if you don't mind. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. It's a great question, because we had actually been making tremendous strides in improving our power efficiencies in the data centers, moving towards a much more green approach to doing computing. But then this amazing thing called generative AI got released to the world, and it threw everything to akimbo, right? And it's a mess. What we're seeing now is that the things that we were talking about is that power consumption is through the roof, and power consumption naturally implies that you got to do power generation, and that is just a nightmare. All right. But if you take the Gen AI workloads out of the equation, all right, and we put them aside for temporarily, we've been doing some amazing things in terms of reducing our power consumption for storage. If you look at how much power is being consumed by storage devices now, it's significantly less than it was in the past on a per terabyte, per exabyte yardstick, if you want to look at it. If you want to look at how much the CPUs themselves are driving, you can get incredibly power efficient CPUs into data centers now that can handle workloads at incredible capacity at very low power and heat dissipation. But these workloads that we're now running are really causing us to take all of those gains that we've made and wash them out while we figure out what this generative AI thing is going to do for us. All right. So I suspect that what we've done as an industry is we've taken a couple steps back while we figure out how to monetize and extract the value out of this Gen AI thing. And once we have done that, and there's a lot of things we can talk about on that side of the house, by the way, we will actually start moving forward again and start reducing our footprint and expenditure. But for right now, we're literally in the brute force approach of using Gen AI. We haven't understood Gen AI well enough to actually optimize how to do Gen AI. So we are just brute forcing it, and that means power. all right? And there's not much we can do about that until we figure that out.
Sandeep, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with Juan. And see, from an ESG perspective, our direct role is improving energy demand and management of the data center. One of the examples that I can really think of is the PUE. Now, as per the guidelines, as per the various regulations, most of the companies, either through regulations or self-disclosures, have to give you PUE. That is the power usage efficiency for every data center. Now, the best place to be in is around 1. From 2000 onwards, when we were around 2.5, and today we are around 1.5 on an average, and we want to be close to 1 as possible as industry leaders. But most of the companies are today kind of aiming to be around 1.3. Other things that we can really think of is the cooling aspect of how we are really looking at the data centers, and what kind of technology can be used, IoT based technology, sensors, and of course Jan mentioned about Gen AI, how that can be used to see that simulations can happen in the right way. And with digital twins coming in, can you design the data centers in a way where the aspects could be much better, or the outputs could come out much better in line with whatever guidelines or the targets those companies have taken.
Great. Thank you for that. Piggybacking, actually, getting back to something that Juan was bringing up, the whole Gen AI aspect of things. It is one of the common I'd say culprits that we often, at least in our newsroom, we talk about in terms of power consumption. And one of the conversations I had actually with my editor in chief just yesterday was the idea of, is there the approach that organizations are taking right now, getting back to what Juan was saying about trying to get their arms around Gen AI, is the chase for AI and trying to get figure out what to do with it, is it just it's kind of like overloading things because there's so many organizations that are just kind of in a rush to try and make use of this, leverage this, then how that ramps up energy consumption. I wonder if there's going to be a period of saying, okay, we're running up and doing all these things right now, but then maybe a point where organizations go, whoa, we actually don't need a lot of these aspects of certain things that we've been chasing on AI, and therefore don't need as much power to kind of fuel what we're doing. Do you think that there's a potential for that, or are we just kind of like on a runaway horse or a runaway carriage, if you will? At least for the foreseeable future, when it comes to the chase of AI, and then the power needed to then support all the things that are going on.
Well, there is an outside chance, all right, an outside chance at this point that some mad scientist, genius kind of a person will invent a more energy efficient way of doing these generative AI algorithms. And in fact, there's a lot of research that's being done on that, right? And if that comes out to be the case, then there is going to be a point where we don't, and that's a big if, right? That there is a argument to be made that we will not need the same amount of power, right? But past history is the best indicator of future performance, right? And in the past, anytime we've provided power to a facility, very rarely do we ever actually scale down power. It's like air in a room, it fills the room. As soon as you have capacity, you figure out other ways to consume it, all right? So yeah, we're in a mad rush right now, and we're building capacity. We have this amazing workload that's going to drive all sorts of innovation. We just haven't figured out exactly what that looks like quite yet. We're going to get there. All right. In fact, if you look at the last couple years, most companies were, as you said, madly running ahead, trying to figure out how to take advantage of this Gen AI thing, partly because there's a lot of hype behind it, but partly because there is value. We just don't know what it is quite yet, right? So what we're engaging on right now is a little bit of a step back, say, hey, yeah, we've discovered that this thing can do a lot of things, but there's other things to consider.
To listen to the entire conversation, look for the Dasu and Hunt podcast on Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music, and other popular podcast platforms.